And I want to turn to some more breaking news in our politics lead. CNN is breaking the news right now that one of President Trump's political appointees at the State Department, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, pushed for a United Nations statement to soften language in the statement that condemned racism and xenophobia. This official also disputed the idea that leaders have a duty to condemn hate speech. CNN's Michelle Kaczynski brings us this exclusive story.
The State Department's new Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration apparently has some big problems with two seemingly benign UN documents. In one, a resolution called the Incompatibility Between Democracy and Racism, which is adopted without vote every few years in much the same form, Andrew Veprick, identified by his initials, outright disputes that officials have a duty to condemn racism, or that combating racism and xenophobia complements democratic multicultural societies, writing, "What's the evidence?" Some commentators assert that a unifying culture, as opposed to multiculturalism, is the best way to promote social trust and combat racism. Also, crossed out are references to racism in political parties or groups that seek to normalize racism. In another statement on the importance of preventing war crimes, Veprick strikes out some simple thanks for the outgoing High Commissioner for Human Rights, saying that's because the UN official had criticized Trump.
Is this not an incitement for others to attack journalists?
Including for the president's attacks on the press.
It's time to expose the crooked media deceptions.
Where one document says, we've witnessed a discouraging trend of populism and nationalism, as well as rising signs of xenophobia, Veprick has crossed all that out. Writing in the margins, the drafters say populism and nationalism as if these are dirty words. There are millions of Americans who would describe themselves as adhering to these concepts, maybe even the president. And he doesn't like the word xenophobia due to concerns over the malleability of the term now and in the future. What real or perceived offense is next to be considered xenophobic, he writes. The State Department responding to these attempted edits with some standard language of its own, a no comment. I did reach out directly to Veprick by email. He did not respond, but he's raised concerns before when he was named to this position. And he has been a Foreign Service officer. Most recently, he was at the White House working with Stephen Miller, policy advisor. So Veprick worked on the Domestic Policy Council. But Senate Democrats raised concerns over his level of experience, over his hardline views on immigration, which are known among his colleagues, and that he wasn't the right fit for this job. Again, that was Senate Democrats saying this. But we did talk to a former administration official also who has experience at the UN and in the National Security Council. This is somebody who worked in the Obama administration. He felt that these kinds of comments on these types of documents were explosive in his words and show that this administration also has a thin skin for criticism, Jay.
Michelle, just to be clear, we don't know what happened with these edits, right? I mean, he did them, and we don't know if the State Department sent them to the UN or not. They might have. We don't know. They won't answer.
No, and also, just after he made some of these edits, according to a source, the U.S. left the Human Rights Council. So it's kind of a moot point where this went or whether other nations would have listened to these suggested edits. The point is the types of things that he wrote, and there's a lot in these documents that we have. We've only showed you part of them, but it goes along that same theme of questioning, why are we calling out political parties who are accused of using racist speech? So the sources we talked to found this so surprising. That's why these documents leaked out. But where this went after the point, we don't know. I mean, we don't know the final, version of some of these edits.
It's still interesting. Kirsten, let's bring in my panel right now. Kirsten, you hear about individuals with these thoughts in the Trump administration, whether it's Stephen Miller or this individual.
Or the president.
Or the President Trump.
Because, I mean, when you look at the words that he's objecting to, condemning racism, how is that out of bounds? That's where we've come to, is that now we actually are going to say that it's dangerous to condemn racism.
No, we have to be careful. He's not condemning racism. Well, I mean, he's not condemning racism.
He's not. He's saying that whether or not it's compatible with democracy.
Yes, he's splitting hairs. He's basically saying, why are we saying that leaders have a duty to combat racism? Normally, for these types of documents.
I mean, that actually was what I was saying.
Go ahead.
I mean, so now we are now saying that you don't have a duty to condemn racism, and I think that this was something that most reasonable people would agree on, that a leader should not be engaging in racist behavior, and if racist behavior happens, that they would condemn it. But we've seen with the president that he doesn't do that. And these words are not actually that malleable. Like xenophobia isn't actually a malleable word. They can look it up in the dictionary. It has a meaning, and it means you have a sort of irrational fear of people who are from other countries. So if they don't like the definition of it and they don't like someone calling them xenophobia, that's one thing, but it's a real thing and they can't just pretend like it's some vague term that we don't know what it means.
So look, first of all, I'll condemn racism.
Right.
It's terrible, right? Nobody's pro-racism in this administration, so I obviously take umbrage with that. Number one, another 2 point maybe on this. I don't know Mr. Veprick, I don't know him at all, but you know who I do know? The State Department? My West Point classmate, Mike Pompeo. Great guy, and I guarantee you he'll condemn racism from the 7th floor on down. I promise you that. So I don't know what this document fully entails. I don't know if they've seen it over there, had a chance to investigate it. But if it is racist in any sense, I promise you, the secretary will speak out forcefully about it. He's a guy who's bringing swagger back to the State Department. He's a guy who is honorable.
Did he condemn the president for saying shithole countries?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? You just said you know for sure that you will condemn it.
Because if it's in his department, Kristen, if it's in his department, right, and this is existing, and this is a racist document, I guarantee you Mike will speak out about it.
How is the president talking about shithole countries not in his department?
Because it's a disputed fact, right, whether that actually occurred or not to begin with, right?
I think, just to be clear, I think the dispute was whether the president said shithole or shithouse. I mean, just to...
Right.
Well, Jake, again, right? So again,
yeah.
I'm not defending that. I don't know if the president said it or not, and whether the president has a view of a country that's unfavorable or not unfavorable. I don't think that's a racist comment that he makes about.
It is racist when you consider that he wants more reasons.
What do you make of all this, Jackie?
It seems like he was applying the both sides logic that we heard the president talk about in Charlottesville to this UN document. It struck me just reading through the edits that he made. It seemed like he was applying like campaign logic to this. Like, we don't want to be hit with this later. We don't want to be on the receiving end of this. That's how I read it. That's right. What they were concerned about.
And we're splitting hairs here because that's what he's doing. He's splitting hairs. I wouldn't say that based on this, I would not say that this person appears to be a racist. I would say, why question this language?
Right.
Language that people have not questioned for years in one of the cases of the documents. I mean, it's boilerplate language that keeps coming up. People are like, okay, right.
But the thing that really that made me think that was it said something to the effect of we can't condemn everything that people say, which is something you hear from politicians when someone says something and they're asked to comment about it. Someone in their party, for example. That you don't usually hear that sort of thing in a UN document.